Here's part 1 in approximately 800 words, using simple English and third-person narrative. The summer sun beat down hard on Maple Street, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Officer Richard Wilson pulled his police cruiser to a slow stop in front of a neat, well-maintained house with white wooden fencing and carefully trimmed rose bushes. His clipboard sat heavy on the passenger seat, filled with property code violation notices. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson stood on her front porch watching the young police officer approach. She was in her late 70s, but her back was straight and her eyes were sharp. Her simple blue cotton dress and white cotton hat spoke of a lifetime of dignity and self-respect. Richard walked up the path, his police boots making soft sounds on the concrete. He noticed how meticulously maintained the garden was, not a single weed, every flower perfectly positioned. This didn't look like a property that needed a violation notice. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Richard said, trying to sound professional but not harsh. "I'm Officer Wilson from the local police department." Eleanor watched him carefully, her hands resting on a wooden cane with a polished brass handle. She had seen many young officers come and go in her neighborhood over the decades, and she could read people quickly. "What can I do for you today, officer?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Richard pulled out the official document. "We've received some concerns about your property's maintenance. There are a few areas that need immediate attention." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. She knew exactly what he was talking about, but she wanted to hear him explain. "The fence needs repainting," Richard continued, flipping through his notes. "The front garden has some overgrown sections, and there's a concern about the condition of your garage." A slight smile crossed Eleanor's face. She had been maintaining this house for over 50 years, long before this young officer was even born. Every inch of her property told a story of hard work and personal pride. "Would you like to come closer and show me exactly what needs fixing?" she asked, her tone neither confrontational nor submissive. Richard felt slightly uncomfortable. Most people he encountered were either defensive or scared when receiving a violation notice. But Mrs. Patterson seemed different, calm, almost amused. He stepped closer, pointing at specific areas. Eleanor listened carefully, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question. Her knowledge about property maintenance was impressive, and Richard found himself unexpectedly impressed. What Richard didn't know was that Eleanor Patterson was no ordinary elderly woman. She had a history that would soon turn his world upside down. A history of resilience, leadership, and unexpected power. As they stood there in the afternoon heat, the neighborhood quiet except for distant children's laughter and a lawnmower, in the distance something shifted. This was more than a routine property inspection. This was the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives. Eleanor's eyes held stories of struggle, of overcoming obstacles, of breaking barriers that seemed impossible. Her weathered hands, still strong and capable, gripped her cane with a quiet confidence. Richard felt something he couldn't quite explain, a sense that this encounter was different. Mrs. Patterson wasn't just another name on a violation report. She was someone special, someone with a depth of experience he could barely comprehend. "I'll make the necessary repairs," Eleanor said finally, her voice firm but kind. "Would you like some iced tea while we discuss the details?" The offer caught Richard off guard. This wasn't how these interactions usually went. Normally there would be frustration, arguments, or silent resentment. But here was this elegant older woman offering him refreshment after receiving a violation notice. As the afternoon sunlight cast long shadows and a gentle breeze rustled the rose bushes, Richard realized this was going to be a day very different from what he had expected. Little did he know how profoundly this moment would change his understanding of judgment, respect, and the incredible stories carried by people who might seem ordinary at first glance. The police station buzzed with its usual morning energy. Coffee machines hummed, phones rang, and officers moved between desks, shuffling paperwork and sharing morning gossip. Richard Wilson sat in the break room, his mind still thinking about Mrs. Patterson from yesterday's property inspection. James Miller, his colleague with short brown hair and a friendly smile, walked in and dropped a thick manila folder on the table. The sudden noise made Richard jump, spilling some of his coffee. "Got something interesting for you," James said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Richard looked up, wiping the coffee from his shirt. "What's that?" James leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Remember that elderly woman you visited yesterday? The one with the property code violation?" Richard nodded, curious. "Well, turns out she's not just some random senior citizen," James continued. "She's the new chief administrative officer for our entire police department's administrative division." The coffee mug slipped from Richard's fingers, crashing onto the linoleum floor and shattering into multiple pieces. Colleagues nearby turned to look, but Richard hardly noticed. Eleanor Patterson, the woman he had been about to write up for minor property issues, was now going to be overseeing administrative functions for the entire police department. His mind raced. How could this be? She seemed so simple, so unassuming, yet something in her eyes yesterday had told him she was more than she appeared. The station's administrative offices were prestigious. They managed budgets, personnel records, strategic planning, and internal operations. This wasn't a small role. This was a position of significant power and influence. Richard's supervisor, Captain Robert Thompson, entered the break room. He noticed the broken mug and Richard's stunned expression. "Everything okay, Wilson?" Thompson asked. Richard struggled to find words. The image of Mrs. Patterson standing on her porch now seemed completely different. Her calm demeanor, her precise way of listening, her understanding of property maintenance. Everything made sense now. "Sir," Richard stammered, I had an interaction with Mrs. Patterson yesterday." Captain Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Eleanor Patterson, our new administrative chief?" Richard nodded, feeling a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. "She's got quite a reputation," Thompson said, pouring himself some coffee. "Worked her way up from the bottom, started as a junior clerk decades ago, and now runs our entire administrative operation." The other officers in the break room were now listening, intrigued by the conversation. Richard's mind replayed their interaction from the previous day. The way she had listened to his citation points, her calm questions, her offer of iced tea, everything suggested a woman who was far more than she appeared. "She knows more about this department than anyone," Captain Thompson continued. "Survived multiple challenges, broke through numerous barriers. Not many people know her full story." The broken coffee mug lay forgotten on the floor. Richard's perception was shifting. The woman he had seen as a potential code violator was actually a powerful administrative leader. He realized how quickly people could be misjudged. How easy it was to look at someone's exterior and miss their true depth, their journey, their capabilities. James patted Richard's shoulder. "Bet you're glad you were professional yesterday, huh?" Richard could only nod. The universe had a strange way of teaching lessons. As the morning continued, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor Patterson. What other surprises might she have? What stories were hidden behind her calm exterior? One thing was certain. His world had just become much more interesting, and he knew deep down that this was just the beginning of something unexpected. The broken coffee mug on the floor seemed to symbolize everything. How quickly perceptions could shatter. How new understanding could emerge from the most ordinary moments. Richard Wilson's routine day had suddenly become anything but routine. The police station felt different that morning. A quiet tension hung in the air, something Richard could sense the moment he walked through the doors. Whispers seemed to follow him, quick glances from his colleagues making him feel suddenly uncomfortable. Eleanor Patterson arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. Her presence seemed to change the entire atmosphere of the building. Despite her age, she walked with purpose, her navy blue suit crisp and her posture perfectly straight. The junior officers stepped aside, offering respectful nods as she passed. Captain Thompson approached her, greeting her with a professional handshake. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," he said, his usual tough demeanor slightly softer. Richard watched. From across the room, his heart racing. He knew what was coming. The meeting he had been both dreading and anticipating since learning about her position. "Send Officer Wilson to my office," Eleanor said quietly to the captain. Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. Minutes later, Richard stood outside the administrative office. His hands were slightly sweaty, his uniform feeling suddenly too tight. He knocked, hearing a clear, "Come in," from inside. Eleanor sat behind a large wooden desk, her silver hair perfectly styled, reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Files and documents were neatly arranged around her, suggesting a meticulously organized mind. "Sit down, Officer Wilson," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Richard sat, trying to control his breathing. He expected criticism, perhaps, a reprimand about the property violation notice. Instead, Eleanor simply looked at him. Her gaze was not harsh, but searching, as if trying to understand something about him. "Tell me about yourself," she said quietly. Richard was surprised. This wasn't what he expected at all. He began sharing basic details: his background, how long he'd been with the police force, his hometown. Eleanor listened carefully, asking occasional thoughtful questions. "And what made you become a police officer?" she asked, her eyes never leaving his face. Richard spoke about wanting to help people, to make a difference in his community. As he talked, he felt something changing. The nervousness was slowly dissolving, replaced by a sense of genuine conversation. Eleanor nodded occasionally, making notes on a small pad. Her movements were deliberate, her attention complete. "You wrote a violation notice for my property," she said suddenly, breaking his narrative. "What went through your mind that day?" Richard felt a moment of panic. How should he answer? But something in her tone encouraged honesty. "I was doing my job," he said, "following procedures. But looking back, I realize I might have been too quick to judge." A small smile crossed Eleanor's face. Not mocking, but understanding. "Procedures are important," she said, "but understanding is more important." She began sharing snippets of her own journey. How she had started as a junior clerk, faced countless challenges, worked her way up through persistence and intelligence. Richard listened, realizing this was more than a meeting. This was a lesson. "Every interaction is an opportunity to learn," Eleanor said, "about others and about yourself." The meeting lasted over an hour. By the end, Richard felt transformed. This wasn't a disciplinary conversation, this was mentorship. As he stood to leave, Eleanor added one final comment. "Sometimes the most important part of our job isn't writing reports. It's understanding people." Richard walked out of the office changed. The hallway seemed different. His colleagues looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. He didn't know it then. But this meeting was the beginning of a journey that would reshape his entire understanding of policing, leadership, and human connection. The day was just beginning, but Richard Wilson's world had already changed forever. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the office windows, casting soft shadows across Eleanor Patterson's workspace. Richard sat across from her, listening intently as she began sharing her remarkable story. "I wasn't always in this position," Eleanor started, her voice steady and calm. 50 years ago, no one would have imagined a black woman could lead in a police administrative department." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Richard leaned forward, completely captivated. Eleanor spoke about her early days. She described a time when opportunities were limited, when doors were constantly closed in her face. Growing up in a small town during the challenging years of racial segregation, she had learned early that survival meant being smarter, working harder, and never giving up. "My father always told me," she said, her eyes distant with memory, "that education and persistence were the most powerful weapons against discrimination." She had started as a junior clerk, filing papers, organizing documents. While others might have been discouraged by the repetitive work, Eleanor saw it as an opportunity. She learned every system, understood every procedure, and slowly began to prove her worth. Years of hard work, countless late nights, and an unwavering commitment to excellence had slowly but surely changed perceptions. She wasn't just breaking Barriers. She was demolishing them entirely. Richard listened, his previous assumptions crumbling with each word. The elderly woman he had initially seen as a potential code violator was revealing herself as a pioneering leader who had fought incredible battles. Leadership isn't about position, Eleanor explained. It's about understanding people. Every person has a story. Every interaction is an opportunity to learn. She shared stories of discrimination she had faced, subtle and overt. Times when her competence was questioned, when her intelligence was overlooked, when colleagues assumed she was less capable because of her race and gender. But Eleanor had never let those moments define her. Instead, she used them as fuel, transforming each challenge into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The most powerful response to prejudice, she said, looking directly at Richard, is excellence. Pure, undeniable excellence. Richard felt something shifting inside him. His entire perspective about leadership, about judgment, about understanding was being rewritten. Eleanor talked about the importance of empathy in law enforcement. A citation is more than a piece of paper, she explained. It's an interaction between human beings. Every interaction is a chance to show respect, to understand. Her words resonated deeply. Richard remembered his encounter with her, how professionally she had handled the potential property violation. Now he understood why. Sometimes, Eleanor continued, people need guidance, not punishment. Our job is to serve the community, not just enforce rules. She spoke about community policing, about seeing beyond surface-level interactions. Each story she shared was a lesson, each experience a teaching moment. Richard realized he was witnessing more than just a conversation. This was a masterclass in leadership, resilience, and human understanding. The biggest barriers, Eleanor said softly, are the ones we create in our own minds. Barriers of prejudice, of limited thinking, of assumptions. Her life had been a continuous journey of breaking these barriers, not through aggression but through persistent excellence, through understanding, through showing, not telling her worth. As the afternoon light began to fade, Richard understood that this meeting was transforming him. Eleanor wasn't just sharing her story. She was offering him a new way of seeing the world. Remember, she said as their conversation drew to a close, every person you meet has a story far deeper than what you see on the surface. Richard walked out of her office changed. The young police officer who had arrived that morning ready to write a simple property violation notice was gone. In his place was someone who had glimpsed a deeper, more profound understanding of human potential. The corridors of the police station seemed different now. Each person, each interaction now held the promise of a story waiting to be understood. 6 months had passed since Richard's life-changing conversation with Eleanor Patterson. The young police officer looked different now, more thoughtful, more compassionate, with a deeper understanding of his role in the community. His approach to policing had completely transformed. Where he once saw rules and violations, he now saw human stories. Each interaction became an opportunity for understanding, for connection. The neighborhood knew the change. Richard wasn't just enforcing laws anymore, he was truly serving his community. He took time to listen, to understand, to help people solve problems instead of simply writing tickets. Eleanor had become more than just his administrative chief. She had become a mentor, a guide who showed him that true leadership was about empathy, not authority. One summer afternoon, Richard responded to a call about a potential property code violation. But instead of immediately writing a citation, he knocked on the door and listened. The homeowner, an elderly man struggling with home maintenance, shared his challenges. Richard didn't see a violation. He saw an opportunity to help. He connected the man with local community resources, helped him find affordable home repair services, and ensured the property would be brought up to code without causing financial strain. This was the lesson Eleanor had taught him. Every interaction was a chance to build, not break down. Every challenge was an opportunity for support, not punishment. The police department began to notice the change. Richard's approach was becoming a model for other officers. He conducted training sessions, sharing the lessons he had learned from Eleanor about community policing, about seeing beyond the surface. Eleanor watched his progress with quiet pride. She had seen potential in Richard that he hadn't seen in himself. Her mentorship wasn't about criticism, it was about transformation. We all have a choice, she would often tell him, to judge or to understand, to divide or to connect. Richard's personal life changed too. He became more patient with his family, more understanding with his colleagues. The lessons of empathy extended beyond his professional life. Community leaders began to recognize the shift. Local meetings about community safety became conversations of mutual respect, with Richard playing a key role in bridging gaps between law enforcement and residents. One evening, during a community gathering, Eleanor surprised Richard. She publicly acknowledged his growth, his commitment to truly serving the community. The recognition wasn't just about his professional achievements, but about his personal transformation. True growth, Eleanor told the gathered crowd, comes from listening, from understanding, from seeing beyond our initial judgments. Richard looked out over the community he now served. The streets that once seemed like territories to be policed now felt like a community to be supported. Each person was more than a potential problem. They were a human being with a story, with challenges, with potential. He thought back to that first encounter with Eleanor, when he had been ready to write a simple property violation notice. How different everything was now. How much he had learned about leadership, about humanity, about himself. Eleanor's mentorship had been more than professional guidance. It had been a profound life lesson about understanding, about breaking down barriers, about seeing the humanity in every interaction. As the community gathering continued, Richard felt a sense of purpose deeper than any he had experienced before. He wasn't just a police officer anymore. He was a community builder, a bridge between different experiences, a listener. The lesson was simple but powerful. Every person has a story. Every interaction is an opportunity. Judgment creates walls, but understanding builds bridges. Richard looked at Eleanor, catching her eye across the room. She gave him a small, knowing smile. No words were needed. They both understood the journey they had shared. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the community. Richard knew his path forward was clear. Continue listening. Continue understanding. Continue growing. One person can make a difference. One conversation can change everything. One moment of genuine connection can transform not just an individual, but an entire community.